The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus told his disciples a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that same city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while the judge refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find any faith on earth?'" A gospel inspired by God. My very good friend and my personal physician, Dr. Arlen Brownstein, is a naturopathic physician, and as well as looking after me for the last 26, 27 years and keeping me healthy, she's very, very loving towards animals. And so the Marin Humane Society constantly will give her sick kitties, and she'll nurse these kitties back to health using naturopathy, and when they're healthy enough, they get adopted out. But if they can't be adopted, she keeps them herself. So she's always 5 or 6 cats. She's 5 cats at the moment. So she's one cat at the moment who's called Sugar Ray. And when Sugar Ray was a tiny little, black little creature, he'd be chasing leaves out in the backyard. And when he'd trap a leaf, he'd bring it through the cat door and deposit it at her feet. And then he graduated to lizards. And he started catching lizards and bringing them in and dropping them at her feet. And they'd scurrying under the television set, and they'd be there for a week. And then finally he graduated to bringing rodents into the house and dropping them in front of her feet. And I often thought, why do cats engage in this kind of behavior? Is it because they want to show off their prowess as hunters? And I think it's actually deeper than that. I think a cat can think of no greater compliment than to treat a person as if they were a cat. And so, the cat brings in what's of value to the cat. Rodents and mice of various kinds and lizards of various kinds or flying leaves, whatever. So it's not just that he's showing his prowess as a hunter, he's treating Arlen as if she were a cat. He can't think of a greater compliment to pay her. And I sometimes think that's how we create our gods. We can't think of a greater compliment we can offer God than making God a human being like ourselves. And so, although we may in fact be built in God's image and likeness, what we actually do is we retool God and we refashion God into our image and likeness, because we can't think of any greater compliment we could offer to him than to make him human like us, except it's human writ large. So we take all the human kind of characteristics, and we amplify them, the good ones and the bad ones. If you think you can get angry, see how God can do, what God can do when God gets angry. He can wipe out an entire nation. He can drown the whole world in a flood. So we take human characteristics, amplify them, and ascribe them to God. Now, this morning's story appears to be such a thing. It's the kind of anthropomorphizing of God. There's a Greek proverb that says, if horses had gods, their gods would look like horses. So every group creates gods in their own image and likeness. So the impression you get this morning from Jesus' story is that God is just like the judge, this unjust judge who doesn't care about anybody whatsoever, but he's been wearied by this widow who keeps coming to him. That somehow the object of prayer, or the way that prayer works, is that we just weary God. We keep on God's case again and again and again, and finally God says, I can't take this anymore. Okay, what do you want? I'll give it to you. As if we can kind of weary God. And that's not what Jesus is saying whatsoever. What he's saying is that we have to be persistent. It's not about beating down God's door to have God change stuff for us. It's persistence in our own efforts to create justice for everybody. Now, the idea of God intervening, I don't think God intervenes whatsoever. God is like, for me, a mother watching out through the back window, watching her little kids play. and they're playing cowboys and Indians today, or cops and robbers tomorrow, or pirates the next day. And as long as they're safe, she's not going to intervene. They're going to have to fix their own squabbles. They're going to have to learn how to socialize. They're going to have to learn justice among themselves. If there's real danger, she'll intervene. But otherwise, she'll let the kids figure stuff out for themselves. And there is no real danger on planet Earth, even if we lose our lives. We're eternal beings who are having incarnational experiences. And the whole point of an incarnational experience is to learn how to love and be compassionate and create justice. So God is watching. Now, obviously God's intent, like the mother's intent, is that the kids would learn to love each other and treat each other fairly. And that indeed is God's intention. But God's not going to come out and intervene, and create justice. If he were doing that, the world would look very, very different from how it looks right now. Obviously, God is not intervening. There's rampant injustice within our country and internationally. So God is not intervening, nor is it God's purpose to intervene. God's purpose is to allow souls the opportunity of incarnation to figure out how this system works and how to create justice and love and compassion for ourselves. So what then is the whole purpose of prayer? Are we just kind of chatting about the inevitable when we speak to God, or we have petitions? That's not true. So it feels to me like that there are 6 main components to prayer. This is how prayer works, it seems to me. That the first component of prayer is a clean heart. No prayer is effective, and by prayer I don't mean we're appealing to God to intervene. I mean that we're radiating energy, the energy of transformation into our world. And the first stage is it has to come out of a clean heart. If I'm trying to create justice in a world, and at the same time I'm holding prejudices against a group, I'm holding anger against a particular person, there is no way my prayer is going to be effective. So the first stage of prayer has to come out of a clean heart. I have to let go of my own prejudices, my own anger, my own sense of revenge against anybody, individual or community. That's the first stage. The second stage then is that the heart has to be now filled with the compassion. And the compassion is the realization that we're all bite-sized pieces of God. That everything that exists, in fact, is a manifestation of the divine. So compassion for other is really love of the self. It's really love of the God self that's within all of us. So having cleaned my heart of prejudices or angers of various kinds, I now have to fill it with compassion. Then thirdly, I have to create a laserized intentionality. Not a kind of, wouldn't it be nice if X happened, or if there were justice. I have to have a laserized intention about what that would look like if there were in fact justice in our world in our times. What would that actually look like? That would be stage 3. Stage 4 would be, I have to walk my talk. It's not enough just to have the intention about it or to send out waves of compassion. I got to walk my talk myself. I have to try to make differences and act justly, and maybe join with organizations who are trying to promote justice in our world in various kinds. The fifth one is that intentionality and that effort has to be in alignment with God's will. Now, although God does not intervene in human affairs, God very definitely has the purpose that human beings learn to love each other. And so it has to be in alignment with God's purpose, not with kind of a national agenda or an international policy. It has to be in alignment with God's purpose. And the sixth piece for me, it seems to me, has to be about trust. That ultimately everybody, because we're all children of God, no matter how many iterations it takes, no matter how many reincarnations it may take, everyone will learn eventually through trial and error that the only thing that works is love. Nothing else works except love. We've been trying warfare now for 5,000 years on planet Earth, and the more we try warfare, the more warfare we get. Warfare never solves any kinds of problems. So we have to trust that eventually, since every single one of us is built in God's image and likeness, that ultimately we will all learn as individuals, and finally as communities, and ultimately as a global family, that the only thing that works is love. Fire, guys. Connie? Yeah, so the first one will be a clean heart, that I have to clean out all prejudices and angers inside myself. The second one would be to fill it up with compassion for everybody. The third one would be to have a laserized intentionality, a real focused intent about what that would look like. And the fourth one has to be, I got to walk my talk. I have to put effort into trying to create this locally or whatever through organizations of which I'm a part. The fifth one is that I have to hold this in alignment with God's purpose. It can't be a national agenda. It can't be like a Catholic agenda. It can't be any agenda except God's alignment with God. And the sixth one is about, I have to trust that since we're all bite-sized pieces of God, it will come to pass. So I can't give up and lose heart and say there's no point in it, it's not working. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Welcome, Libby. Bobby.
Prayers of intention.
Right.
Is that fair game?
Yes.
And do you follow it up with, your will, not mine, be done?
Absolutely.
Is that a reasonable
Yes.
thing that doesn't
Yes.
show lack of faith?
No, absolutely not.
Enormous faith.
It shows enormous faith because it shows the faith of being fully in alignment with God. It's not an egoic agenda, it's a sole purpose. So there's a very big difference. I keep saying that every organism has two kinds of intelligence. There's the intelligence which is native to the organism. Every little flower growing in a field has an intelligence that orients it to the sun, draws through photosynthesis, it draws chlorophyll into its system, it takes nutrients from the soil, it knows how to survive. So every organism has a native intelligence that allows it to survive, to replicate itself, to protect itself, to access resources. But then there's a soul that comes in and takes up occupancy of the organism. And that has a very, very different agenda. The agenda of the organism, its intelligence, is survival, self-replication, self-defense, accessing resources, competition for resources. The agenda of the soul is very different. The agenda of the soul is there's only one source, there's only one God. Each of us, our children, are articulations of this. So it's about equality and justice and compassion for all. And the purpose of incarnation is to create an exquisitely choreographed dance between the intelligence of the organism, ego, and the intelligence of the source, which is soul, to do this dance. So a prayer that you're mentioning then, Bob, is the realization by the ego, or the intelligence of the organism, that it must bring its agenda into alignment with the mission for which the soul came in. So rather than a lack of faith, it's faith in the ultimate source of all that is. Yeah, Connie.
I'm thinking about centering prayer.
Okay, right.
Because I think very often, excuse me, that when we think about prayer, we're thinking about what we're going to say to God.
Right.
And in centering prayer, we're going to empty our mind
Yes.
and listen to what God's going to say to us.
Brilliant.
And that's a whole different.
It's beautiful.
I
That's
feel
beautiful.
And
Totally.
not easy to do because there's always the grocery list and
Totally.
somebody you have to call and
Totally.
this and that, the other. But if you can
Yeah.
get to that
Empty.
little space,
Right.
and it's almost like this is the soul entering through the mind.
Totally.
It's not the brain talking.
Exactly.
It's the soul. And the
Totally.
mind.
Right. So it's a great distinction. So for me, it's the distinction between meditation and prayer. When you think of God, insofar as we can even try to make any sense of that, there's an ineffability to the mystery about which we can say nothing. We can experience it, but we can't articulate it. It's like you give birth to your child. You can't explain that to anybody else who hasn't given birth to a child. You can experience the awesomeness of looking at something you've created, but you can't put that into words. No words are adequate towards that. So you can experience the ecstasy of being a mother, but you can't explain it to somebody who is not a mother. The same thing, there's an ineffability about source, about which we can say nothing, but which we can experience. So that's the ineffable and transcendence of God. But there's the immanence of God, that this God has given birth. This God has given birth to trees and rocks and mountains and lakes and rivers and human beings and dinosaurs and kitty cats and whatever. And so that's the immanence of God. So for me then, prayer is where the immanence of God initiates a discussion with the transcendence of God. So we're talking from immanence to transcendence. And centering prayer, or meditation, or contemplation, is where the transcendence of God, speaks to the immanence of God. So one has been initiated from source, from transcendence toward immanence, and the other has been initiated from immanence towards transcendence. Yeah, Jojo.
Just think one more of those could be thanks.
Gratitude, absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's important to realize that when we think of prayer, typically, we think prayer is asking God for stuff. And of course, that's only one tiny part of the conversation. If you had a child and the only time the child spoke to you was when the child wanted something from you, it wouldn't be a very healthy relationship. The child would climb into your lap and put his arms around your neck and say, I love you, Mama. So the child will love you in various kinds, or give you little gifts or whatever, or tell you stories about what happened in school. And so the vast bulk of the conversation between a parent and a child isn't about give me or I want or whatever. It's about I love you and cuddle me and here's what happened in school today. And so we have to realize that prayer is Eucharist, prayer is thanksgiving, prayer is gratitude, prayer is writing poetry. Mathematics can be a prayer where we're discovering the intricacies of God's, creation. So there are many, many, many different types of prayer. But we tend to think, prayer is where you have a list of stuff you want from God and you're kind of checking it off and reminding Him again and again in case you forgot. Yeah. Mary.
This is really a question more around the ego, because someone like an Eckhart Tolle would say he no longer has an ego. And you've always said how important the ego is to our conscious function.
Absolutely.
So when I'm just trying to understand, what does he mean? Does he mean that he is so aligned with the ego and soul purpose? That really they're just now one. Is it just the alignment is so pure?
Yeah, I presume that's what I haven't read enough of his stuff. I've read The Power of Now, which I really, really loved. And I think I read is there one called A New World, or a second book of his? But I'm not au fait enough with his material to be able to kind of say what he means by what he says. But very definitely the ego is a very important member in the incarnational dance. A soul cannot have an incarnational experience in the absence of an ego. In fact, a soul can't reach enlightenment in the absence of incarnations which involve an ego. The ego is the CEO of waking consciousness. The ego is that which is responsible for the health of the organism and its survival in the environment in which it finds itself. And so it is very, very important that there be an ego. But the ego needs to be in the service of the soul rather than think it's the master of the soul. And so very many of Christ's parables can be unpacked with that understanding, that the controversy and the struggle is between an ego which thinks it's the soul, rather than the servant of the soul. And so Paul will put it very powerfully in his letter to the Romans, where he says something like, the good that I would, I do not do. It is the evil I do not want to do, I find myself doing. Who will save me from this difficulty? So Paul is experiencing the very same thing, that there's a soul that's wanting to be loving and compassionate and whatever, and then there's an ego with its own agenda. And is finding that dance and that balance between them. So we need an ego. You cannot survive on planet Earth without an ego. In fact, when you look at the great teachers, the Jesus Christ and the Buddhas, they have very strong egos. But this is not an ego that wants to control and dominate. It's an ego that's in total service of the mission and is strong enough in order to create circumstances in which the soul can actually flourish. Yeah. Joe.
I heard a homily which was quite nice about prayer, and that God knows what we want and desire before we even recognize it. But the necessity of prayer is for God to wait for us to recognize that we need this relationship, this bond. And so it's more about us in concert with God rather than, we have this and we have that and what have you. But it's recognizing that God wants us to pray.
Okay. I agree with that. The one wrinkle I would add to it is perhaps that I don't think God has any kind of a terminus ad quem, a kind of an end point that we have to get to through a particular route. I think God, God's agenda, if you want to call it that, is that, we recognize ultimately that we are God stuff and that the only response to that realization is love. But whatever the route we take and the amount of time we take, God has no interest whatsoever in that. God is not going to rush the process or say, this is the only road you can go. If you want to get to where you want to go, God is not interested in what route you take. It's a little bit like my GPS system. Even with the GPS system, I still manage to get lost on occasion. But the GPS never reprimands me. It never says, I can't believe I told you to hang a right 10 minutes. Aye, Vesmir, what are you doing? It's okay, I presume you still want to go where you said you want to get to. And so now, because you've made several mistakes, here's what you need to do. So all my machine says to me is route recalculation. Route recalculation. It doesn't say, damn it, wake up and smell the coffee. And so that's what God says. I presume you want to get where you tell me you wanted to go, to learn how to love. Okay, and so you find yourself now here, you know. So to get to love from here, here's what you need to do. If you would, you know, been listening earlier, it would have been a different route. It would have taken less time, but God says, as long as you get there, I don't care how you get there or when you get there. Only that you get there. Yeah. Karen.
When you were talking about the two different kinds of egos within the person,
Uh-huh.
it seems like it's the same thing that's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
That there's this,
Oh, yeah.
this desire for survival, and it's always,
Right.
you know, how do you kind of interval the individuality
Yeah.
versus mutuality,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
confusion of things, whether it's in personal relationships.
Totally. So where the out-of-control ego is really dangerous to the human person, it does very limited damage. It's basically going to only upset yourself and those with whom you're in personal, you know, relationship. However, there's an ego of the oligarchy. There's an ego of the cabal or the group who are calling the shots, whether it's the military-industrial complex or it's the politicians or it's corporate world or whatever. And when the ego of the oligarchy is out of control, then you're looking at international damage. And so it is really, really important that, you know, every organization, every individual, every organization, every species has a kind of a group ego. And when that is out of control, you get really, really serious damage. And that's where our world is right now. That there's an ego of the oligarchy which is making decisions constantly about the appropriation of resources and the accumulating of extraordinary wealth and control over people's destinies. And with the stroke of a pen, you can put 1 million people out of work, you know, and destroy 1 million families and not care a whit about that fact.